let's talk about it.
Hi, I'm Tricia.
And I'm Stella.
And welcome to Season 2 of Let's Talk About Soaps. Now, as you can see, your normal co-host, Alora, isn't here, but no worries. She'll be okay. She'll be here for Episode 2.
And for the first episode of Season 2 of Let's Talk About Soaps, we have the beloved actress Beth Chamberlin, who played Beth Raines-Spauldind on The Guiding Light.
No. He was stable. I would have left, but he was stable.
Honey, he was stable, but then he crashed, sweetheart. There was two...
Stitching the feathers back on the wings of the dove. 'Cause there's a storm raging inside, and I'm trying to.
In sickness and in health, and forsaking all others.
Yes. We are on location, but we want to thank her manager, Rob Zamba, yes, for making this possible. This is very exciting for all you Guiding Light fans. You're going to be thrilled.
Now, before we start, this interview is going to be in 3 parts. We're going to talk about your childhood growing up, and then we'll move into the juicy part, Guiding Light, and then we'll, end with talking about some of the projects you've been working on since. So let's get started.
And welcome to Let's Talk About Soaps.
So let's talk about getting into acting. How did this journey start?
The journey did start when I was a child, and I credit this one instance as being probably why I was persistent enough to be an actor later in life. I was actually quite a sick child. I had some urinary tract problems, and that were birth defects. And when I was, I guess, in first grade, my mother put me in dance classes, and one of the reasons she did that was because they actually didn't think I was going to live that long. And so my mother said, well, we're just going to let her do whatever she wants to do, and I'd seen a dance recital and wanted to do that. So she put me in dance classes, and it actually helped to strengthen my body. And during my first grade year, though, I was very sick, so I was not at the dance classes very often. So when it came to recital time, I was there and did my 2 numbers, and then I saw my friends doing this other glowworm number. I'll never forget that. And it was at dress rehearsal, and I looked at my mother and said, why aren't I in that? And my mother said, because you can't do the things that those other girls can do. Because I had missed so many classes. And I thought to myself at that age, that's never happening to me again. And that summer, while everybody else was off, I was practicing on my own and practicing. And the next year I did the same thing. I kept practicing. And so it was 2 years later, my dance teacher called my mother, and private classes were by invitation only, and she called and said, I think your daughter really has something.
Wow.
Oh,
So
that's nice.
I had started to have private lessons, and I became a soloist. So I went from not making it to, but I decided that moment was such a key moment for me, and it was key also because I began to practice and work harder than everyone else, and that's how I ended up becoming a dancer, and a dancer that was a soloist. But then, because of that, I got to go to New York City to study at American Ballet Theater, where this teacher would bring us to New York City, because I grew up in northern Vermont, and so I got this sense of this world out there. So when I went off to school, I went off to NYU, and I was a dance major. But I had a confidence, and I felt at home being on stage. So when I made the transition to acting, it was sort of it was a natural transition. Actually, I knew I wanted to be an actor in high school, is the truth, but I was frightened of it. So it took me a few years to completely make that transition.
Now, you mentioned that you had some sickness and you were in the hospital. Now, how much of your childhood was were you hospitalized?
About 9 months, until it was the middle of my first grade year, where they finally did a surgery that was new in this country, and the urologist that performed the surgery was went up to the hospital in Burlington and did this surgery especially because they had done a number of surgeries and they weren't able to correct the problem.
Okay.
But it was in the middle of my first grade year. They were, so I was, I guess, 6. The surgery was successful, and they didn't know if it was going to be long-term successful or not because there had been damage done to my kidneys during this time. But it wasn't, and since that time there has been a lot of studies with physical exercise and how it strengthens the immune system. And one of my problems was that my immune system was just so, from fighting off infections that were happening with my urinary tract, it was just so depressed, and they have done studies since then. So my mother was thankfully that she did put me in dance, and that I think in fact did strengthen my immune system.
Well, your story is a very good one for anyone young people who are suffering from any kind of physical ailment.
And believe me, I also had Petit Mal is a form of epilepsy as a child too, and so I felt as a child like oh, why can't I just be like everyone else? Why do I have to? And I had to take medicine all the time, and it was really, but those difficulties sometimes give us great power later in life, and. So I feel fortunate, strangely. All these years later, I feel fortunate that all these things occurred.
Yeah, you must, that whole story was very inspirational. Like, what was the turning point, though? Because it seems like you knew from you were young, or you've been told that you weren't going to live long. And how
I don't think I was, I'm not sure that I was completely aware of that.
Okay.
To some extent I was, because I had very clear memories of being in the hospital and other children that were not going to make it. And I knew that. And again, I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to make it. I'm going to make it. I remember thinking that's not going to be me. And, which of course I had, no control over that. But so I did have an awareness, but how much awareness you can have as a child about what that means to make it or not make it, I'm not sure.
So you're in high school, you're dancing, you're traveling down to New York City, and you're doing shows down here during high school. When was your first professional acting job?
My first professional acting was. It was a commercial. It was a commercial that was how I got my Screen Actors Guild job. But I have to tell you a funny story. This was when I was at NYU. I went to an open call. My first audition ever was an open call for A Chorus Line, the musical A Chorus Line. And I went, and the person I went with said, they're not looking for your type, so you'll be typed out. And I was just there to get experience. So they didn't type me out. In fact, they were looking for my type. And I made it through. There was a jazz number and a tap number, and actually I made it through the tap number. And I was doing the jazz number, and now, it went from 300 people down to, I think there was like 5 of us or something left on the stage. And I was 17 years old and thinking, and I was thinking to myself, but I don't have anything prepared to sing. I'm not a singer anymore. So I was just here for experience. And I think, how crazy was that you could have sang Happy Birthday or done anything. It didn't occur to me, so I deliberately really messed up the jazz routine so that they would cut me. You couldn't just think to yourself, well, the
national anthem. So that was an example of where you were afraid of success. And
I suppose so, yes. That's a real thing, too, being afraid of success, because I think that many people do go through that. And I know I had a real turning point too in my profession when I started doing some of Louise Hay. People that know self-help books might know Louise Hay, and started doing some of her work with affirmations and things. And I think it was really why I ended up originally booking Guiding Light, because I was doing that, and my confidence in myself grew, and my feeling it was okay to succeed grew. So I do think there's
So
something to that.
tell us how this happened for you.